This is a video about objective beauty with a focus on what objective means. It'll be mostly casual. I'm really just sitting here drinking tea, talking about something I love. I'll be reading a script, it's kind of loose. And this will probably be a pretty long video. It is structured as a response to the Theory of Anything podcast by Bruce Nielson. This comes from a clip from the episode 54. It's titled The Computational and Explanatory Universality, IQ, Part 2. Interestingly enough, there's a segment of this episode where Bruce and his co-host Peter wonder if beauty is objective. They've been sparked by David Deutsch. David Deutsch has his conception of objective beauty, and there's also some important principles of computation that kind of inspire this curiosity of theirs. So I'll give you upfront the main problem that we'll see and my approach to addressing the problems, okay? So Bruce and Peter, they will not really clearly state what they mean by objective. That's why we're having a video about objectivity, okay? They'll touch on 5 different conceptions of objectivity for beauty. They'll be accepting some of them and rejecting others. The first one is objective means hard to vary. The second is objective means error correction happens. The third is objective means that there's an underlying universal thing we are approximating. The fourth is objective means that you could be wrong. And the fifth is that objective means that something transcends the individual. Okay, they're all related in some way. Maybe they're all necessary for objectivity, but the clips here don't really spell it out. They just kind of casually talk about these different conceptions, okay? I will have a conception of objectivity that is simply that the beauty is independent from an individual. I follow this concept of objective knowledge from Karl Popper. And I am proposing that beauty is objective knowledge. This just means that beauty can be independently improved, it can cause specific transformations, and it can have surprising and interesting, unpredictable consequences. Throughout this video, I will provide my conceptions on how to evaluate objective beauty. It'll be 1, how well it resists variation. 2, how widely it replicates. 3, how reliably it causes transformations. And 4, how many things could go wrong. I take each of these as logical properties of beauty. Okay, that's what we'll cover. As I said, this is going to be structured around a reaction to a Theory of Anything podcast. I should note, I'm not being particularly careful with my edits. It's going to be edited clips. And I'm not trying to represent Bruce's and Peter's position exactly faithfully as they believe currently. And they're just speaking casually in this clip anyway. The video, the whole episode is not about objective beauty. They just had a segment. But I want to edit these clips so that they're understandable to someone who has not listened to their podcast. And I will give a little bit of context. But I'm not including everything that they said. I'm cutting out major portions of what they're saying and trying to make it more clear, as opposed to trying to faithfully represent what they said. And anyway, this is from a very old podcast. I'm sure that Bruce and Peter have updated their positions since this recording. I'm really just using this as a jumping off point to express my own views on this topic. And I gotta say, I absolutely love this podcast. Like, I've listened to all their episodes. I've listened to some of them many, many times. I've taken notes while listening to these podcasts. Many of my ideas are derivative of Bruce's ideas. So like, I'm super into this podcast. I really like it. This podcast has the most content about aesthetics based on Karl Popper's philosophy and based on David Deutsch's philosophy. It's something I wish they talked about more, but I mean, it's gold for the things that I care about and the things that I love. So great podcast. I love what they're doing. All right, if you're into this, welcome. My name is Zachary, by the way. Hello. And be prepared to comment anything that you find interesting. Bruce starts by mentioning that beauty is hard to vary, that he thinks that this does not mean it is objective.
I buy the overall argument from Deutsch that beauty is hard to vary. I don't think that means it's objective, but I do feel like his argument here is incomplete.
Okay, so we start off with Bruce's first conception of objectivity, and he rejects this one, obviously. It's that objective means that something is hard to vary. He's saying that it's not the case. Hard to vary does not mean objective. Hard to vary just means that most changes would make it worse. So in the case of music, as we will be discussing shortly, there will be some changes that make a composition more beautiful, while most other changes will make the composition worse and they should be discarded. I mentioned this as one of my conceptions of how to evaluate beauty. I called it how well it resists variation. I really like this classification of hard to vary. If something changes, the beauty no longer works. But really, this has to be off of vibes alone. There's not really a strict metric for how to determine that something is hard to vary or to the degree to which it is hard to vary, that we don't really have that. Thomas Kolka, he has a metric called intensity. And this is the number of possible meaningful alterations of a work of art, which make the work of art better or worse. And you divide that by the number of possible neutral alterations, okay? If there's a work that has no possible neutral alterations, and you assume that you do all the positive alterations, so the only meaningful alterations are alterations that make it worse, okay? So you're left with something that is very intense in that any alteration makes it worse. Okay, so these are interesting classifications to me, and it is a metric I am interested in. I consider this to be one way to evaluate beauty. I consider this hard to vary, how hard to vary something is, to be a logical property of the thing. But I don't really have a proposed way to actually evaluate this objectively outside of just vibes alone, right? It's just an individual decides how hard to vary it is. It's based on what alterations you can consider at the time. You consider positive or negative alterations or neutral alterations and so on, but you're the one who's considering it. I don't think there's a easy way to determine all the possible alterations. You get what I'm saying? So it's all based on vibes. It's all not some sort of objective evaluation. And for Bruce, obviously, this does not indicate objectivity. That's what he wants to stress. But what would indicate some sort of objectivity for beauty?
The mere fact that Mozart throws away versions of his song and he keeps making error corrections to it. I agree that demonstrates error corrections going on, that there's something underlying this that he's working towards, that there are literally objectively better or worse versions of this song. In that sense, I buy the idea of objective beauty.
I'm feeling really good about this video already. I don't know why, I just feel good about it. It feels good. Okay, so Bruce feels that beauty is objective in this sense that there is error correction. This is the second conception of objectivity that I mentioned. Error correction process happens. He sees that there is error correction in music. A song may be adjusted to be better or worse. So in that sense, this is the sense in which he accepts objective beauty. When he mentions error correction, he just means that Mozart will listen to a composition and then make changes. If the new version is better than the old one, then the old one would be seen as having had errors, right? That you've corrected the errors compared to the new one, okay? And Mozart will continue to do this until there are no more errors that he can correct. And if you do that, there are no more changes that make the work better, so it becomes hard to vary. So you see how hard to vary and error correction are similar in those ways. They're related in that way. In another sense, if something changes and then whatever it is that changes can no longer cause the effect that it was meant to cause, then it has an error, and then you notice the error because it can't do the thing that you want it to do. So like in music, it sounds good in one way, but if you change it, it no longer sounds good. And you notice the fact that it doesn't sound good, so you can correct the error. So there's also that aspect of hard to vary and error correction together, working together. They're very similar, they're related processes or related things, related properties, attributes, whatever, they're related. So Bruce accepts objective beauty in the sense that this error correction process does happen. But Bruce will go on to show a problem that he has with this conception of objective beauty.
Here's the problem, though. The same is true for recipes. It demonstrates hard to variness. Recipes are hard to vary. We have a place here called Waffle Love. He was working as an accountant. He needed to make money, but his real love was cooking. He kept trying to come up with better and better waffles. And as he tweaked the recipe, he got improved feedback from his family until finally they were like desperate because these waffles were so good because he had found just the right combination for how to make the dough so that this was the yummiest waffles you could imagine. And then he knew, I've really got something. Sure enough, turns out that there's, people just love these waffles, and these really were better recipes than the ones he threw away. This is the exact same argument that Deutsch is using with Mozart and music, right?
Yeah.
So the question you have to actually ask is, what is the objective thing that you're moving towards? Is it something universal, like in the laws of physics? That's what I think Deutsch wants to say.
Okay, so we just have the assumption that recipes are not objectively beautiful art. I don't know why. I think it's true, like in a kind of a trivial sense, because the recipe is really it's the instructions to create the art. The food is really the work of art, right? It's like sheet music for music. The sheet music is the notation to instruct the performer how to perform, and then the performance is actually the work of art. But whatever. Okay, I understand what he means. He thinks that the food is not objectively beauty work of art. It's not a candidate for objective beauty. We cannot consider waffle of waffles to be objectively beautiful because what is the objective thing that it is moving towards? And is it universal? Okay, so now we have this third of 5 conceptions of objectivity in terms of objective beauty. This is, there is a universal thing which we are approximating. Okay, I'm so glad I'm making this reaction because I have not understood this conception of objective beauty. I've not had this conception in my mind ever. And so I only picked it up after writing this script. You'll see a little bit later that Bruce will make a comment to me directly, and he's assuming that I mean something like this. And I was really confused about that up until now, until like writing the script. So I'm happy that we're writing the script. I'm going by like kind of line by line to understand what he means. All right. Anyway, let's continue. So objective means that there's a universal thing that we are moving towards. Okay, think like the laws of physics. They're never really fully universal, but each iteration becomes more universal. We expect that there are actual universal laws of physics. So like Newtonian mechanics, it applies to a wide range of physical contexts, but it's really just an approximation of the actual universal laws of physics. And Einstein's mechanics, it applies wider than Newtonian mechanics, so it's more universal, and it's a better approximation to the actual universal laws of physics. So the fact that there is an actual universal law of physics that is actually universal, that's the thing that makes these objective. Einstein will eventually be replaced by something better, sure. And then that will be replaced by something even better, okay, sure. Ultimately, any law of physics will not be fully universal. They're all going to be approximations to the actual universal laws of physics. And there's a little bit of a hidden part too here, which is interesting. We expect that the actual laws of physics to be universal in some domain, but they're not fully universal in all directions in all domains, right? It's not like we expect the universal laws of physics to apply to dreams or to fictional worlds. Right there, they are universal in some domain, but not necessarily in all domains. Okay, so they're not expected to be universal in all ways. But imagine that we did find some universal law of physics that applied to all things in physical reality and applied to all dreams. Like, that would be amazing. I don't even know. Like, I would be gobsmacked by that. Right? That'd be crazy. Or imagine if we had a different universal law that would apply to dreams and everything in physical reality and all fictional worlds. Like, what the heck? That'd be crazy. So that would be definitely better. It'd be more universal also, but it's universal in different domains. So you don't necessarily need to be universal in all domains. You have to be universal in some domain. Okay. And the question I'm going to be pointing at is, how do you determine what that domain is, or if that domain is universal enough to be called universal or whatever? Let's get into that a little bit here. Right, so when we're talking about taste in art, what is the domain of universality there is for beauty, or taste or art or whatever? What is the objective thing that you're moving towards? Is it universal? Objective means that there is a universal thing that you are approximating. So the question is Mozart or is the Waffle Love guy, are they creating works of art which are approximations to works of art that are universal in some way? Okay, so what does it even mean to be universal for art? Should it be universally descriptive like the laws of physics are? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Should they be universally attractive to some group? Maybe that's kind of more of what people think about. Would it be attractive to all physical and abstract systems? Maybe. Like, do I need to have a work of art that's literally attractive to my tea, like has a gravitational pull or something like that? Would it be attractive to all biological beings, maybe? Or maybe it's attractive to all people, or maybe all people with some specific type of knowledge. So if the waffle love guy is approximating the waffle that would be enjoyed by all humans alive today in Utah, is that universal enough to be considered universal, like a universal objective thing that we're moving towards? All right, so to me, this seems like a kind of a non-trivial problem to actually clearly define what the domain of universality is for a work of art or for beauty or for anything of that nature. It seems like a difficult problem. I don't actually understand how to figure that out. So we can see that some parts of like I just said about all people in Utah, like some parts of that can be seen as quite easy to vary. And when I say that, I mean that there's really no reason for me to say people in Utah, like today, people in Utah, right? Like, why did I say today as opposed to saying tomorrow or like yesterday? Like, why am I choosing a specific time for this to apply? Why am I saying in Utah? Why am I not saying a different state? Like, I live in Georgia. Why not say Georgia? Bruce lives in Utah. That's why I said Utah at first. But like, it's kind of arbitrary why I'm choosing a particular state. So why am I restricting it to a particular state? And then why am I saying people? Why am I restricting it to human beings? Or why am I restricting it in any way to people? So I'm considering those to be easy to vary. And by that, in this sense, I mean easy to vary as in I don't have a reason for choosing today in Utah only humans. I don't have a reason for any of those particular things. So if I wanted to have a version of this that's not so easy to vary, it would be something like, is this waffle approximating the food that would be attractive to all open-ended knowledge creation systems from the past, present, future, across the whole multiverse? Okay. So you can see there's that seems to be universal, right? All time, all parts of the multiverse. There's a specific knowledge creation system that I'm referring to. If it were, this is the most broad knowledge creation system. I'm not talking about something that's lesser than that. I'm talking about only the most extensive knowledge creation system. If I give you that, that's really, there's a reason for all those things at least. But really, this is totally outside of how I normally think about objective beauty. That it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It doesn't feel right to think of it in that way. It's pretty close to something that Bruce will mock very soon. But really, it's just like a preliminary speculation while trying to think in this sense in the way that is quite unfamiliar to me, that Bruce is putting up as one of the ways that we need to be thinking about objectivity, right? Again, this conception of objective that he's talking about is objective means that there's a universal thing that we are approximating, right? And what is the domain of universality? It's going to be attractive to all possible open-ended knowledge creation systems, okay? It's a weird way of putting it. I don't particularly like it, but I think it's fine, I guess. So anyway, it's quite clear that I don't exactly understand what Bruce is looking for when he's looking for this sort of universal thing that we can move towards. And in that sense, I don't know what it is that we're rejecting when we say that there isn't a universal thing that we're moving towards, okay? As I said, this is quite outside of how I normally think about it. And I think a part of the problem is there's a way of conceiving of beauty that's different. I think of it differently than what Bruce is thinking, kind of implicitly thinking. So the big problem, I've mentioned this many times on this channel, I think it's a mistake to look exclusively at the level of the entire work of art, rather than looking at the various components within the work of art. So I think Bruce is implicitly looking at the level of the work of art, right? It is the waffle that is beautiful or not beautiful, and objectively so, and universally so. So I don't usually think about entire works of art. Of course, I also don't think about the universal application. So I would not ask something like, is this work of art approximating some objective universal work of art that would be accepted by all people? That's not the kind of question I would ask. I would ask something more like, will this chord progression replicate into more minds and more works of art than an alternative chord progression? That's That's the kind of question I'll be thinking about. I would see Mozart as creating chord progressions and adjusting those chord progressions so that they work in more context, they fit into more contexts. And those more contexts will be more works of art and also more minds, more people's minds. They can remember it better or something like that. It's a chord progression that is adjusted such that it will be noticed and remembered by more people and then copied into other compositions. While a worse alternative would be less noticeable by fewer people and remembered by fewer people and less widely copied. Okay, so instead of thinking about the entire work of art as analogous to knowledge, I'm seeing specific substructures within the work of art, like a chord progression, as a knowledge-bearing structure that can be replicated into two types of environments. It can be replicated into the mind, or it can be replicated into other works of art. So, as I said before, I see beauty as a form of objective knowledge. And this knowledge, it has a niche. The niche is a logical property of the knowledge. The niche just means this is the set of environments in which it can remain stable in, and the set of environments in which it will replicate. And occasionally you want to have it cause other transformations, not just replication. This knowledge can be improved such that it has a wider niche, which means that it increases its reach. So, given this conception that I just gave here, it kind of might be a little bit obvious why I don't think in terms of something universal, right? Because we would need Mozart to be approximating a chord progression that replicates into all possible minds and replicates into all possible works of art. But clearly, we don't have a chord progression that does that. So it's not a viable target because there's not a chord progression that's always in everybody's mind at all points in time. It doesn't make any sense. So again, there's just like a lack of clarity in what the domain of universality is. And that's just something I've not considered. And so that's how I see it. In my conception, there is objective improvement. There is a way to increase the range, the reach, to increase the niche, increase the situations or contexts in which the knowledge can survive or replicate or cause certain transformations. That's all possible. There's this objective improvement, but it still does not address Bruce's concern of not approximating something universal. Okay, so we could presumably increase the niche until we hit a brick wall. We're going to get into more details about that right now.
So the question you have to actually ask is, what is the objective thing that you're moving towards? Is it something universal, like in the laws of physics? That's what I think Deutsch wants to say. But Steven Pinker says, well, no, music may just be cheesecake for the ears, just like there's certain biological, parochial, but biological desires that we have that are wired into us by genetics. And so some things taste better on average to more people than others because we share a lot of genetics. You can find some people that are different, but it's going to be a level of variance. There won't be that many. You can no more find a society of people who love random notes, which is Deutsch's example, than you can find a society of people that find dung that tastes good, right? You can probably find an individual in both cases, but you can't find a society because that's just not the way things work. So the mere fact that something's hard to vary doesn't actually guarantee you an underlying universal law. What it really guarantees you is that there's something underlying it, but it might be parochial.
Something being hard to vary does not guarantee an underlying universal law. It might be parochial. Okay, parochial is just a very fun word. I don't know why it's so often used in like David Deutsch and everyone who is around David Deutsch. They love this word for some reason. Anyway, it means like narrow reaching or narrow scope, narrow range or something like that. Parochial is used as a word to mean the opposite of universal. And of course, in this case, it is the opposite of objective because universal, you need universality for objectivity. Okay. Bruce doesn't literally say it in that way, but that's how I'm interpreting it. I think it's a fair read of what he means. Okay. Something might apply to all humans, for example, but it could still be parochial. It doesn't automatically count as universal. Why? I'm actually not sure because I don't understand why the domain of universality can't include all humans, right? I don't even know what that means, right? So we don't have a real clear delineation of the domain of universality. And then in this case, even if we did have a clear delineation, for some reason, some things don't count. I think I have some ideas about that, and I actually want to replace this conception of universality with the conception of measuring the reliability of the beauty. And what I mean here is that we're identifying all the background knowledge necessary for the beauty. Okay, so it's going to take a little bit to really understand. I haven't got a clean way to exactly describe why this conception of reliability takes over universality and also parochialness, whatever. But it'll become clear. I'll try to point it out as I'm describing it. Okay, so we have beauty, which is a form of objective knowledge. And when it is, when it is arranged in a particular way, it can replicate, and it could also cause other transformations, presumably psychological transformations. And I want to be able to measure how reliably it can replicate and cause those transformations. Okay? To be reliable, to be more reliable, you'd have to account for all of the background knowledge. So the background knowledge is the stuff that's required for replication, but the background knowledge itself does not replicate. It's just a part of the environment. Okay, so this gives more clarity for knowing where it can replicate, right? And that is the thing that makes it more reliable. As a very simple example, to appreciate a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, that poem needs to be replicated into a mind. For that to happen, the person who is replicating it into their mind, they need to already know how to read English. The poem does not include instructions for how to read English. That knowledge must already be present in the environment, which is the mind. So English is background knowledge. If you did not have the background knowledge, you would not be able to replicate the poem. And that's like the simplest way I can put it. If I give the poem to someone who doesn't speak English, it won't replicate. Like, they won't understand it. They won't be able to appreciate the beauty. If I give the poem to a rock, the rock doesn't understand English, so it also doesn't replicate. The background knowledge is that you need a person who understands English. So at the very least, very, very least here, in order to appreciate this poem by Edgar Allan Poe, you need to understand English. And there is a hard limit outside of that range. People who don't understand English cannot understand this poem. There's a hard limit. Okay, so there are going to be other background knowledge that's going to be limiting this even more, narrowing it down even more. So there's like a range of people that could possibly appreciate this poem. This is going to be the background knowledge. And then at that point, it'll be pretty reliable. Like, only though, like, everybody in that set of people is going to appreciate the poem, but not everybody, because you will never be able to account for all of the background knowledge. I think, at least. Okay, so just sticking to this specific requirement of needing to understand English, I think that English is not like a necessary feature of reality, right? English is not necessary. It's not like every being in the entire world needs to understand English. It's not even that every being that's going to progress in an infinite, unbounded way is going to understand English. And another way of what I'm saying here is to say that English is arbitrary. It's arbitrary knowledge. The specifics of the English language, it's arbitrary knowledge. So no distant civilizations are going to independently come to English. I doubt that even an independent civilization would come to something similar to English. I mean, even with the same starting point, they probably wouldn't come with something similar to English. Whereas, so now let's consider different types of knowledge, like geometry or physics, something like that, right? Distant civilizations will independently come to similar knowledge. Like, they will cover the same topic. So geometry and physics, those would be something, I'm just going to call it necessary, whereas the specifics of English are going to be arbitrary. Okay, I don't actually really like those labels, but that's just, I made these labels myself. I don't have a better language for it currently. That's just what I'm going to call it. Okay, so we have necessary background knowledge, and necessary as in these are necessary features of reality or necessary features of civilizations that progress, and independently civilizations will be able to create that background knowledge. Okay. So one evaluation I would have for the objectivity of beauty is to determine if it depends on background knowledge, that is arbitrary background knowledge, or if it depends on background knowledge that is necessary background knowledge, right? The difference between arbitrary or necessary. The arbitrary background knowledge will necessarily have this sort of hard limit, whereas the necessary background knowledge also has a limit, but it's a necessary limit because it's limited at the range of understanding the actual necessary features of reality. Okay, so I'm going to try to clarify this even more because I do feel like I'm not extremely clear with how I'm describing this, but maybe that's just my own self-consciousness here. Okay. So let's say a waffle is a work of art that contains beauty. Okay. This beauty will replicate into the mind of the diner and it will cause pleasure. Okay. I do think this is an awkward construction of how to say it, and it's kind of simplified, but it's trying to make this clear, and I think it does help it make it clear. Okay. I think that the waffle will contain several distinct, beautiful structures, but we'll just focus on one. Let's say the fluffiness of the dough balancing with the sweetness. Okay. Fluffiness of the dough and the balancing with the sweetness, that's going to be something that you can notice. It will be replicated into your mind. You won't have a different alternative version of that that's better. So it'll replicate into your mind and it will replicate widely. A lot of people will notice it and appreciate it. If it were less fluffy, you wouldn't notice it, so it would be boring in some way. If it were more sweet, it would be too sweet, and it wouldn't cause pleasure. It'd be unpleasant. So it's just fluffy enough to spread the sweetness in the mouth, and it blends with texture and all these types of things. Okay, that entire thing that I just described, that is a substructure. That is a part of the waffle, okay? Now, the question is, does that require background knowledge? And I think very simply it does, right? Obviously, in order to appreciate the fluffiness and the sweetness, you need to have a mouth, for example, right? You need to know how to chew something, for example, okay? You need to have specific taste buds for tasting sweetness, okay? You might even need to have familiarity with other waffles or something like that. All right, whatever. Those are all knowledge, right? And when broken down like this, we can see that those are knowledge, and some of them are, well, I guess all of those are arbitrary knowledge, I think. I mean, most of those are not necessary, right? But then to understand the balance between sweetness and fluffiness, that's more of a necessary type of knowledge, right? To compare multiple things and have a ratio of them. That's just like geometry or something, right? Like that's algebra, I guess. I mean, that's arithmetic, maybe. I don't know. It's a mathematical type of thing, which is closer to something that would be independently appreciated by any, or understood or developed by any civilization. So any intelligent being would know how to relate multiple things or balance multiple things, whereas the specifics of our taste buds, that's based on human DNA. So let's just focus both on those two things, right? Our taste buds are based on our human DNA. It's created based on the particularities of our planet Earth. I don't think it's a requirement for all beings that progress to have taste buds that can detect sweetness. I don't understand, but that doesn't make sense to me why that would be necessary. So I'm saying that that's arbitrary, okay? And which means that the reach of the beauty of a waffle, this particular waffle, is necessarily limited to human DNA. Does that make sense? It's necessarily limited to human DNA because it relies on that as background knowledge. I think it is totally fine to rely on something as knowledge or background knowledge, right? Because it also relies on a being understanding geometry, or I don't know why I said geometry, arithmetic, ratios, let's say. It relies on a being understanding ratios or balancing or comparison, which I think is totally fine. That is a limit, but it's a different type of limit. It seems like a necessary limit. You get what I'm saying here? So one of the limits is necessary. One of the limits is arbitrary. I think this is the concept that I want to replace parochial with. In parochial, we're saying it's limiting in scope, and I'm also saying that it's limiting in scope to human DNA. So similarity there. But I also think it's limiting in scope to restrict it only to beings that understand ratios, right? Whereas that doesn't seem parochial to me. It doesn't seem to match the thing that is meant to be matched when saying parochial. In the same sense, it doesn't make sense to say that like our laws of physics are parochial because they don't apply to dreams, right? Like they don't apply to dreams, but does it fit to call it parochial? I don't think parochial is meant to fit in that way. I don't think that's how the word is meant to be said. So I think ultimately these are very similar concepts, right? The way that I'm saying is very similar. Parochial and arbitrary background knowledge, similar types of things. Maybe they do. Maybe that's what Steven Pinker meant the whole time. Maybe that's what Bruce means the whole time. But I just have to put it in that way to make it understandable to me. So as long as your beauty depends on arbitrary background knowledge, there's a limit to how much it can be improved. There's a limit as far as the reach or the reliability goes. You can only reach so far. There's a hard limit.
In the case of taste, I think we pretty much assume it's parochial. Like I came across one person that tried to argue that there was an underlying something to taste. And it's not a very viable theory. We know that taste is a matter of taste.
Okay, we know that taste is a matter of taste. It's just, for whatever reason, it just happens to be definitely so. Taste is a matter of taste. Just reiterating here that parochial is the opposite of universal. Opposite of universal means that it's the opposite of objective. Parochial means it's not objective. Taste is necessarily parochial for some reason. Okay. So even if we're making waffles better such that they're enjoyed by all people, the fact that it's all for humans means it's still parochial. And if we're matching kind of the way that I was thinking about it, is that if it's just good for all people and for some reason it's based off of DNA of people and we consider that DNA to be arbitrary knowledge, then it's limited to it's arbitrarily limited, let's say. That's what it is. It's arbitrarily limited, which sounds a lot like saying the word parochial, right? Arbitrarily limited. I have a slightly different take here. I do think that a lot about eating is based on arbitrary background knowledge embedded in our DNA and culture and all that. But I don't think that all of it is. I don't think all of it is just based on taste or the way that he said it. Taste is a matter of taste. You know, it's a cute thing to say. It's funny. But I don't think that's the case. And we're just going to talk about food for a little bit. And this is just, I just want to have an excuse to talk about food. Unfortunately, this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy diversion here for a second, and it's going to be fun for me. But unfortunately, I haven't had a reason to just go all in on every aspect about food, which I would love to do one day. We're not going to do it all today, but we're going to get a bit into it. Okay. I think food is highly complex. It's probably one of our richest forms of art, one of the richest forms of art available to people today, modern times. Right? It's something I would consider, I call it high content. It has high aesthetic content. I'll talk about what that means. But it involves the 5 tastes, like your 5 taste buds, 5 different types of taste buds: sweet, sour, umami, salty. What's the other one? Bitter, right? It includes all those things. It also includes olfaction, which just means smells, like you can smell things, the sense in your nostrils. It's also not only limited to your nostrils, but anyway, you can smell things. You can smell things in the front, and you can smell things from the back. There's a orthonasal and retronasal. Okay, so that's already a lot. And then to consider all of the possible compounds that can be sensed through olfaction, it's just crazy. It's ridiculous. I don't even think there's a limit. Like the way that we determine that. I don't even know. I don't know how to determine. I don't know how we determine it, but it's not at all like taste. With taste, there's 5. There's like specific chemicals that can be detected. With smell, it's very different, and you can just kind of arbitrarily detect any chemical. Not any, but like most of them. The range of it is super crazy. And then combinations do weird things too. Okay. So that's already a lot. That's already interesting. Also, as a part of eating food, sight is important. And sight changes a lot of the experience, the taste experience. So seeing things is a part of the taste experience. Hearing things is a part of the taste experience. The physical sensations of touch are part of the taste experience. the heat, the roughness, and so on, pressures, like just pressure on the mouth and in the esophagus. In addition to that, there is a interactive component. So in order to eat food, you choose what to pick up at what time. Like you figure out the balance of when you want to eat certain things, and then you put into your face, and you literally chew. And that's like a whole skill in itself to chew things. And I drink tea all the time, so I think about tea, and the swallow is very important for the tea. So swallowing becomes a skill, and it literally is a skill. I know that sounds a little funny, okay, but like to swallow tea, there are ways to swallow it to um, align with the smoothness of the liquid, the beverage, or you could swallow in such a way that you don't even notice how smooth or not smooth it is. So there's like a literal skill to it, and that changes obviously how beautiful it is. It changes the beautiful experience. So there's like all these things going on. Plus, on top of that, there's a time component. So things change over time. You eat something, the beginning of it tastes different than the middle, and then it tastes different after you swallow. Then there's aftertaste, right? And then you have things called cross-modal effects. Cross-modal means that like your sights will affect what you hear, or your hearing will affect what you taste, and so on. Like if you see the red wine, you're going to taste more of red. You see the redness of the wine, you're going to taste more red. If you were to put dye into your wine, it changes how you experience the taste because it's a cross-modal effect. The sights affect the taste. Okay, and then you also have multisensory effects, and that's when multiple senses come together to have something unique happen. So one of these is crunchiness. Crunchiness is like there's a physical sensation in the mouth, right? But there's also a sound that you hear in your ear, and you hear it in the bone conducted hearing. So you hear it like from inside of your jaw, and you also hear it from sound conducted hearing. So if you were to eat something that's what you think is crunchy, and you had your mouth open as you eat it, it would seem more crunchy because the crunchy sensation is not the physical sensation. It is the combination of the physical and the sound and so on. And there's also the texture of the saltiness and so on. So all of it comes together to make crunchiness. It's not just like the vibratory feeling. Anyway, so multisensory is when multiple senses come together, but they create a new distinct individual different sense. Like you can distinguish the sensation of the feeling of the vibration as you're eating something, and you can distinguish that separately from the sound of the bone conducted sound and the air conducted sound, and you can distinguish that from the saltiness. But when they all come together, they come together in this new distinct thing, which is called crunchiness. Do you get what I mean here? Okay, all of that is going on with taste, and there's more. I'm not even giving you half of it, right? Like there's so much more going on. I love this. I love this so much. Like this is the most rich art that you could have. It includes all possible, like the full sensory range, and all of it could be like, let's say hypothetically, if you were to really care about the types of works of art you're making, culinary works of art you're making, you could control all of those things. So that's what I mean by it's high content. It goes across different senses. Or another way of saying it, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. Yeah, that's how I put it earlier. There's a lot of things that could go wrong with it. If you changed any one of those things, with tastes, with food, with the culinary arts, if you accidentally change the ambient humidity of the room, it could cause the whole thing to fall apart because the ambient humidity is a part of the food taste experience, and that is an aspect of it being high content. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, but we're going to try to simplify it so that we can talk about this in a more sensible way without going too crazy with it, as much as I do want to go crazy with it. Okay. So let's simplify this to say food is just the arrangement of our five tastes, right? Just a simple ratio of saltiness, sweetness, bitterness, umami, and sourness. Okay. It's just those five things. That's all we care about. And then we also have in our DNA, certain type of background knowledge. And that background knowledge is going to be something that nudges the bitterness to be stronger or to be more noticeable, rather. There's also like a cutoff, like you can't get more bitter than, there's like a certain limit to the bitterness, um, and so on. So that's kind of like the background knowledge. So I'm thinking of the taste as the arrangement of these 5 elements. But then in addition to the arrangement of those 5 elements, you have these things that arbitrarily, I'm calling it arbitrarily distort those 5 elements. Okay, making something seem more unpleasant unnecessarily, overly pleasant unnecessarily, and so on, right? So I am going to make the case. I mean, I'm not going to really make the case. I'm just stating it, and I guess it'll make sense. Maybe I'm making the case. I don't know how to put this. Okay. My thoughts on this are that arranging 5 elements can be an objective art, can be a non-parochial thing. If you just arrange 5 elements in a particular way, you can arrange it in a way that is more noticeable or less noticeable, right? And the fact that you can arrange 5 things in a way that's more or less noticeable means that there is some objectivity there, I think. That's the part of it that would be not arbitrary. And then obviously the part that is arbitrary is the boosting of sweetness being more important, or the boosting of bitterness being something to be avoided, and so on. And those have to be accounted for. So you could just account for those things. And so I think if you account for those things, then there is a underlying thing about taste, which could be universal. It doesn't have to be based on anything. It's really just the arrangement of 5 elements. And there's a way to arrange 5 elements that is not very well noticeable and not memorable. And there's a way to arrange 5 elements in a way that is noticeable and is memorable. Remember, I'm just saying that taste, we're limiting it down to 5 tastes and the ratio between those tastes. And that's the entire art is just going to be the ratio between the 5 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami. So like, let's try to imagine what I mean visually here. So imagine a equilateral triangle. This just means that a triangle with all sides are the same length and all the angles are the same angle. Okay. There's a simple balance. All the angles and lengths are the same. Okay. You can easily imagine if you slightly altered any of the lengths or any of the angles, you would be able to correct it back to the original. Or if you slightly altered it, you wouldn't remember. Like if you had a triangle that was a 58, 61, 61, like 58 is one of the angles, 61 is the other angle, and 61 is the other. It'd be difficult to remember that. It'd be difficult to like write it out or draw it. It'd be difficult to have the image in your mind because it's just slightly off balance, and you would kind of naturally want to make it a 60, 60, 60, which is an equilateral triangle. That's just the arrangement of 3 things. Like I'm just saying that that's an arrangement of 3 things. We can imagine that would be fairly any being would be able to do that. If it was slightly off balance, it'd be easier to remember the equilateral triangle versus remembering the close, almost equilateral triangle. Okay, now imagine this equilateral triangle. I feel like I'm saying that weirdly. Equilateral? Anyway, imagine this equilateral triangle, and imagine you have a lens to see it. Like you can't see it. You can't see it without distortion. You have a distorted lens. So in this distorted lens, the bottom is too wide, or the side is smushed, or something like that. Any number of variations. Something is stretched in some way. Maybe the lens isn't even a normal lens, like it's not a regular lens, so it's smushed on one part, but smudged in somewhere else, and you get what I'm saying. It's a lens. Okay. So imagine you have that lens. It throws off the balance. But you can imagine adjusting the triangle such that it counteracts the lens to still show an equilateral triangle. So then you have let's say you have an image, you have a lens, and then you have the mental image. That's just a simple way of putting it, I think. So you have the lens that's distorting the triangle that's actually there. So you can change the triangle that's actually there so that the distorted image becomes an equilateral triangle. Does that make sense so far? I think that makes sense. I wish I had some sort of visual aid to this, but I don't know how to make that in any easy sense, in any easy way. Okay, so my thinking is that the lens is the parochial thing, right? The lens is the overly overemphasis on sweetness or overemphasis on bitterness, right? That's the lens. It's giving the slight distortion. But ultimately, what we're doing is still arranging 5 elements. So the parochial part is just the lens, and you can account for that. And it would be easy to understand that if you had a different alien species or something like that, where you wanted to display the same art, the ratio of 5 things, relationship between 5 things, you could just adjust the thing to account for their differences in balancing of sweetness. Like they have a different boosting of the sweetness, or they have a different boosting of the bitterness. Again, there will be a arrangement that is um, the naturally more stable arrangement. Okay. And then there will be lenses that sort of arbitrarily distort it. So you might have to have a distorted version of the art in order to get the proper arrangement in your experience. And you should be able to account for those changes and give the same experience to an alien or whatever, right? Because it is important that these things are, um, let's say there's substrate independence to the beauty here, right? Because the beauty, the actual beauty, the way that I'm seeing it here, the actual beauty is the relationship of 5 elements. There are 5 things, and there's a ratio between, the sweetness and the bitterness and I'm not going to go through all of them again. There's a ratio, and the relationship between those things, that is the thing that is beautiful. The structure that is stable, a particular relationship between those, that is the beauty. And that can be more stable or less stable. And that can be the underlying objective thing that is underlying our taste. And of course, that's a simplified vision of it because I limit it down to the 5 tastes. But as I described earlier, you also include the smells, which is a whole different dimension. You also include the physical aspect, which is a different dimension. But um, it doesn't really matter because if you can just arbitrarily add any amount of dimensions, you still get the same type of thing. You have a structure that is stable because there's a relationship between all these different things, and some versions of it are going to be more stable than other versions of it. And you're going to have all these distortions, but that doesn't matter because you can account for those distortions. And if you account for those distortions, then that means that you can have a stable structure be stable across different cultures or across different species even. So that's my case for taste not only being a matter of taste. Of course, I do think that in some part there is, a matter of taste. Obviously, I'm saying the phrase that Bruce said. I'm making the case that taste is not only parochial or subjective. There's some elements of it that are not subjective, that are objective, that are wide-reaching, let's say. There are some components which are necessary features of reality because there will be structures that are necessarily more stable than other structures. Okay. And I also think that those stable structures will be able to be converted into other forms. You could have it be, well, it's all substrate independent, in some sense. I haven't laid out exactly what that means or how that fits, but I think you can have a ratio of how to relate to different things, and you can have it be visual, you can have it be auditory, or you can have it be taste, or you can have it be in any other form, because the ratio is the thing that's the beautiful part, the relationship between multiple things, not necessarily the particularities of what the things are. Okay, but Bruce does not have a conception of any objectivity in taste. So we're going to continue with his understanding there taste is just a matter of taste.
We know that taste is a matter of taste. If you don't like waffles, and it just isn't your jam, and you prefer broccoli, there is no sense in which you are objectively wrong. It literally is a matter of taste. And yet there is a sense in which that recipe for waffle love was better on average for society. More people liked it. That is an objective fact that exists. It actually was improving.
Can you be wrong for preferring broccoli over waffles? Well, in some sense, I think you can be. And in another sense, I think it's a mistaken comparison. Hey, by the way, if you've made it this far into a Zachary Mizell aesthetics video, oh my God, thank you so much. That's so cool. I'm glad you like it so far. Please leave a comment. Tell me if you like broccoli or waffles. Okay, first, let's see why I think this is not a fair comparison. Okay, I'm going to go to an analogy in science. Is it wrong to prefer Newton over Einstein? Well, this is a very clear one because we know for sure one of them is false and one of them is less false, let's say. One of them is less mistaken. Newton is definitely false. Einstein is less mistaken than Newton. And yet still, I think it is not wrong to prefer Newtonian mechanics over Einstein. Not always, at least. I'm saying Einstein here, but of course I mean relativistic mechanics. So I just want to make that explicit. And relativistic mechanics makes it pretty clear when Newtonian mechanics is a fine enough approximation and totally workable, right? It might be, in even some cases, a better use of your computation to use Newtonian mechanics because it's easier. So it's not automatically wrong to prefer a false theory, or in this case, a more wrong theory, or more specifically what we're talking about, a less beautiful food. So even if we do objectively determine that waffles are more objectively beautiful than broccoli, it would not be wrong to prefer broccoli. However, in this case, I think it is still disanalogous because asking whether you prefer broccoli over waffles is more like asking whether you prefer Newton over Maxwell. Now, I don't know if you guys know physics and all this kind of stuff, so that might not make a lot of sense, but the scope of things that are described by Newtonian mechanics are not the same scope of things that are described by Maxwell's equations. So they're totally different fields, and it doesn't really make sense to compare one over the other in this sense, right? They have a relationship in that they are both science, but they aren't both describing similar things or meant to apply in the same range of things. So in the same way, waffles and broccoli are related in that they're both foods, but I don't think that they are attempting to apply to the same. They aren't in the same niche. Is that the right way of putting it? They don't replicate into the same type of contexts. A few months back, I commented on the Theory of Anything episode on Spotify, and I said, I'm increasingly falling onto the side of objective evaluations of taste, such that waffles are objectively more beautiful than broccoli. And Bruce jokingly replies, well, I mean, waffle love is objectively more beautiful than broccoli. No, it's not just my opinion. 100% of people agree on that. And if someone does disagree, then they failed the Turing test and they are not a person. Okay, so, he's a little bit mocking me. I mean, he's a lot of it mocking me here, okay? Fair enough. Now, I don't know if Bruce thinks that the only criteria for objective beauty is that everyone agrees, but maybe that is what he thinks. I mean, of course, there needs to be some universality. What is the objective, the universal thing that you're going towards? That's one of the questions that he asks. Maybe, fair enough. That might be one of his requirements. But that's the difficulty with the word objective, of course. He means something, or in this case, he means a lot of different things from the podcast so far. And then I say something about objective, and he thinks I mean something specific. So everybody means something a little bit different by objective in many different contexts. Of course, it means different things if you talk about objective truth, if you talk about objective beauty, if you talk about objective knowledge, you talk about objective, all of these things just mean different things. Objective morality, even. I don't like the word. But that's just me. Okay. Anyway, it's clear that nothing would meet that standard that Bruce is talking about currently, that 100% of people must agree to it. I replied in a long-winded way, as is common for me, and you can understand that if you're this far in the video that I'm kind of long-winded. Okay. I said, I sense that you're joking, and I'm laughing along too. But really, I wish there were better language here. Objective knowledge, for example, and objective truth, they don't mean that everyone agrees. But it's common to think of objective beauty in that way, I guess. I wonder why. So let's try to understand my position quickly. Waffle love has curated relationships between tastes and smells and textures that could be abstracted into other foods and also other arts and other contexts. In other words, it has reach and it has content. The reach can also be independently improved by adjusting those relationships. While broccoli, on the other hand, is a single ingredient food, it has fewer curated relationships between tastes and textures and so on. And it makes it have less content and less reach. There are fewer things that can be independently improved to make better because it has less content. And you can't abstract very much of it into other foods, so it has less reach. So by this measure, Waffle Love waffles have more content than broccoli and more reach than broccoli, making it more beautiful than broccoli. Or at the very least, Waffle Love waffles are more prone to beauty than broccoli is. Okay, that's my response. I still think that, I think it's a fine response. I think I was conflating a couple of things. I still at that time hadn't untangled the different ideas of beauty, because now I think of, one evaluation of beauty is the reach. Another evaluation is how hard to vary is. Another evaluation is, if you've accounted for all the background knowledge, how reliable it is at causing specific transformations. I think those are all different evaluations of beauty, and I might even call them different types of beauty. But anyway, I hadn't had that. I wasn't thinking in those ways when I wrote that comment, so I was kind of conflating these different types of beauty or different evaluations of beauty. Because I was conflating those things, I misunderstood the fact that I think it's a failed comparison. Like I think that you shouldn't be comparing broccoli to waffles. I just don't think the comparison makes sense. But you can evaluate the reach of these things, and you can evaluate the content of these things. And you can compare the two, the reach of broccoli and the reach of waffles, the content of broccoli, the content of waffles, and you can compare them. Okay. So the main instance I want to talk about here is that Waffle Love waffles have more aesthetic content. More content just means that there are more things that could go wrong. The fluffiness could be a problem and it would destroy the work. The sweetness might be a problem and it destroys the work. I don't really know a lot about waffles. That's why I'm only talking about fluffiness and sweetness. But there are other things I guess that could go wrong. Because more so than broccoli, there are a lot more fine-tuned relationships between things that are curated, and if they were different, it would not work. Whereas broccoli doesn't have this issue because there's so much fewer things that are being curated in broccoli. Of course, a better comparison would be Waffle Love waffles to an amateur waffle, right? And I think the Waffle Love waffles would be strictly better than the amateur waffles because they replicate in a wider niche and they have the same, scope. You'd want to have the same niche, and the Waffle Love waffles have more content than the amateur waffles, right? And the same is for broccoli. I bet the modern broccoli is strictly better than the broccoli, the wild broccoli that was domesticated 2,000 years ago by the Romans. I'm just gonna guess the broccoli back then was not as good as the broccoli here today. And I think those would be objectively better objective improvement in the broccoli from 2,000 years ago. That was the first time it was domesticated versus the broccoli today, modern broccoli, even the ones in grocery stores. Okay. So I think that's where you have a better, easier time of having a objective preference. One is better than the other. Okay. But now let's look back at the main question. The thing that Bruce actually asked, can you be wrong to prefer broccoli over Waffle Love waffles? I think not. It's not an appropriate comparison. We can say that one has more reach and one replicates in more environments, or one is more reliable at the transformation that it wants, or one has more aesthetic content. We can easily make those comparisons, but it doesn't. They're not really. They're not covering the same subject matter, so the comparison doesn't make sense. And ultimately, really, if somebody has an unexpected preference, one somebody prefers one thing over the other, and you didn't expect it, or you didn't understand it, or you don't know why, that's really that's more of a nod. That's more of a it's an indication to update your theory of what is beautiful, to update your theory of what is being replicated, or update your theory of the background knowledge necessary to cause the replication, right? It just means that you don't understand something. So the fact that something is not preferred by somebody means that if you expected them to prefer it, it means that you just didn't understand what's going on in their mind, or what background knowledge that they have in their mind that's affecting it. You don't have a fully you don't have a fully comprehensive view of the beauty that you are attempting to evaluate. And wow, isn't that great? Because that means you can improve it. So that's a good signal. I think this is similar to the fact that Newtonian mechanics does not accurately predict the position of Mercury sometimes. And we don't say that Mercury is wrong for not conforming to the predictions of Newtonian mechanics. We say, okay, the theory is incomplete, and we can come up with a different theory. You know, Newtonian mechanics are the old waffles, and Einstein mechanics are the new waffle love waffles that are better. Okay, as the waffles improve, of course, they're going to be better than the amateur waffles, and they're going to be harder. They're going to have more content. They're going to be harder to vary. There are going to be certain relationships that are there for a reason. They're going to be memorable to more people. And as Bruce says, they're going to be better on average. I think that's a fair way of putting it. But again, the on average just means that you still don't have a full accounting of the background knowledge, because you understand that it is it works within this certain population of people. Everybody in Utah today, of this group of people, a lot of them are going to like it. It's reliable. A lot of them are going to like it. But if you understood more of the requirements, you would have a smaller group of people that you give the waffles to, and a higher percentage of them would like it. That's kind of the ideal, I think, in terms of understanding the beauty, understanding the actual thing that is replicating and causing the specific transformation that you want in their psychology, them liking it, whatever that transformation is. All right, so Bruce is going to continue. He's going to say that there's still a lot of open questions here. Obviously, I think there's a lot of open questions too. That's why we're talking about it, having a lot of fun with this. So
I think there's a lot of questions there. I'm again, my goal isn't. I actually think that Deutsch may turn out to be right about this, but I don't think his argument is yet sufficient. He got us partway there, but he's not yet differentiating between things like taste, because his arguments work just as well for taste. That's the problem. Now, how do I then relate that? Well, I don't know. I mean, like, if it turns out, does taste have a computational explanation for why certain waffles taste better than others? I don't even know how to answer that question. Sort of. I mean, it's going to come down to certain chemistry laws, certain things about evolution as to why we prefer certain, some levels of sugar versus others. I mean, yes, there's going to be some sort of computational reason to explain taste if you want to get really technical. And yet it doesn't really, it kind of misses the point, right? Because ultimately this is parochial. It's just the chance of evolution that we happen to have certain taste preferences, and therefore taste it's hard to vary, just like music, just like beauty, but it's also just subjective because it's parochial. It's both at the same time. We don't have a good enough argument yet to know if that's going to be true for beauty.
Okay, so I think at this point we have accounting, like everything that he just said. We can understand. My response to that would be that some parts of taste are necessary elements. Some parts are going to be parochial. There is some computational component, and I think we can describe like the reasons why people like certain things. And the way that I talk about it is going to be some parts that are going to be necessary features of reality, or necessary features of beings that progress indefinitely, whatever way you want to swing that. And then there are going to be some parts that are just based off of the arbitrary accidents of DNA, or the history of a particular person, personal preferences because of you like certain things due to psychological associations with a certain time in your life or something like that. Familiarity. These types of things are like accidents of history, accidents of DNA. They're arbitrary knowledge. So I think we'll be able to distinguish those things to have a computational element. And I think in both senses, it will be a way of computationally showing how or why something is liked or the beauty being replicated into a being. Okay, so like with all that said, have I missed the point of objective beauty? I don't think so. I don't think it's missing the point to clarify that sort of thing. I think once you distinguish the difference between the necessary background knowledge and the arbitrary background knowledge, it is no longer like just missing the point. I think what he's saying is right. If you only have arbitrary background knowledge, then who cares why you like one thing over the other? It's all arbitrary, like whatever. But I don't think it's all arbitrary. And I do think that this applies to all art. So with music, there are going to be some melodies that are necessarily easier to remember and easier to replicate. There are going to be some chord progressions that are necessarily easier to replicate, and so on. There are going to be other elements of music. There are going to be these aspects of music that are going to be easier to replicate, and in that sense, easier to remember. In that sense, easier to cause the transformation that it wants to cause or that you want it to cause, and so on. It's going to be more beautiful. If beauty is anything, at least beauty is that. Right. And I think that's important to like hammer down on. If beauty is anything, it is a component within a work of art that replicates and causes transformations, right? It's not the whole work of art. You don't need to evaluate the entirety of the work of art. It's specific objective knowledge embodied in the work of art. The art is a vehicle for knowledge. The art is the environment for knowledge. It's about creating new knowledge in a work of art. And that knowledge that we create in a work of art is called beauty. Of course, any work of art will be full of knowledge that's parochial or knowledge that is arbitrary, but it will also contain some wide-reaching knowledge, or it could also contain some wide-reaching knowledge that is based on the necessary factors of reality and things like that. That's how I see it, at least. I hope I'm not missing the point of art. But even if I am missing the point, that's fine. I don't think that the standard conception of beauty needing to apply to an entire work of art and needing to lead to universal agreement, I don't think that's not a good starting point to care about beauty. So like if I'm missing that, then that's fine. I'll happily miss that and go on to the thing that I'm actually interested in. But I hope I'm not really missing the point of beauty. But really, I think whether or not we call what I am interested in beauty, like this objective knowledge embodied in works of art, whether or not we call it beauty, whether or not we consider it to be objective, there is knowledge there, and that knowledge can be hard to vary, and that knowledge can expand its niche, that knowledge can be adjusted to cause transformations, and those things can be done independently, and it can be independent of a person, it can be independent of a culture. You can have background knowledge. You can determine if the background knowledge is necessary for a culture or necessary for reality rather, or arbitrarily limited to a culture or arbitrary based on your DNA. You can determine all those things. And some of those you can have knowledge in a work of art that has surprising consequences, which means that there are constraints on different works of art that contain that knowledge or constraints on where it can replicate. Like all of that is interesting and leads to more progress. And, that's a great way to miss the point. If I'm missing the point, I would love to miss the point in that way. And I think that if everything I'm saying about knowledge embodied in art, if you care about beauty in any way, it has to at least be that. Because what else could it be? Whatever actual beauty is, it has to be some form of knowledge. It has to somehow conform to Popper's epistemology, of course, right? You could think of it as a replicator in environments, so that you can think about Richard Dawkins's theory of replicators, right? Of course, you have to have that be a part of it. It must be substrate independent if it is knowledge, of course, right? The Turing Turing principle has to be applicable to this. So, you know, all of those things must be there. And so whatever we're talking about with beauty has to have these elements. So what I'm talking about at least includes beauty. That's how I see it, at least, I think. All right, we're going to move on a little bit and talk a bit more about David Deutsch and his conception of objective beauty. He talks about this in The Beginning of Infinity, and Bruce is just not convinced by it. You know what? Me neither. But let's hear what Bruce has to say about it first.
I don't really think the flower argument he uses in Beginning of Infinity is a sufficient argument either. He talks about this. He talks about how we also find peacock feathers beautiful, but he scratches that up to being parochial. But why couldn't it be that there's a joint evolution where humans preferred flowers because it was a sign that there was, fruit or water there? I mean, like, there could be a completely parochial explanation for why humans and bees find flowers beautiful.
Yeah, I'm fully with Bruce on this one. I don't understand why the birds are somehow parochial, but the flowers are not. I'm going to try to talk about it a little bit and try to give a case for it, but I just don't get it. Okay. So I don't think my position, I should say this very clearly. I don't think my position is reflecting what David Deutsch's position is about objective beauty. I think I have pretty unique thoughts about these things, but it's heavily based on the conceptions of things that David Deutsch talks about. And of course, a lot of the things that Bruce talks about also. So I'm using a bunch of David's language and a lot of the underlying concepts that David talks about, but it doesn't seem to match what David has ever publicly talked about in terms of objective beauty or beauty at all. Okay. My position seems to be my own. Hopefully somebody watching this video, it expands to their position too. Maybe more people will have some similar type of position that I'm talking about. And hopefully other people can correct the errors in the position that I'm talking about. But anyway, as far as I know currently, it's only me. Okay, but let's get into the specific argument about flowers, which it really did not sit well for me either when I first heard it. And funny enough, the first thing I ever encountered from David Deutsch was his lecture about flowers. And that is the whole reason why I care at all about anything that David Deutsch has ever said. I listened to that lecture about why flowers are beautiful. I was rolling my eyes through the whole thing. I thought, this is so ridiculous, but it was interesting enough. And then when he started getting into the implications of it, I was like, holy shit, I need to understand more about this. Let me buy the book. Let me read it. I read chapter 14. That was all I read. Did not understand a word of it. So I read the rest of it. And now I'm here. Okay, it's been about a year. Now we're here. All right. Never turning back. I love it. But still unconvinced by the particular arguments that he gives in The Beginning of Infinity about why flowers are beautiful and objectively so, and why that's a case for objective beauty. I don't really understand any of that stuff. Okay. But the first thing I want to address here is that I think there's a mismatch in category. Peacocks are a specific type of bird. Birds are birds, right? But flowers it's like broad, flowers there are a lot of different types of flowers. There are a lot of different types of birds, right? But there's only peacocks or peacocks. You get what I'm saying here? The category, there's a category problem or somehow. So I think that we should be saying birds and flowers rather than peacocks and flowers, right? Because peacocks are a particular type of bird, while flowers are not a particular species. And I don't think this is only a biological reason to distinguish it. I don't think it's just like a problem of the taxonomy or whatever the heck. It's just that there's so much variation in terms of flowers, and we consider a lot of them to be beautiful. And there's not any variation at all, I don't think, in peacocks. I mean, I think every peacock you see is the same peacock. I'm just imagining that. Like, I don't actually know. I can't differentiate any peacock from any other peacock. They're all the same to me. Whereas there are a lot of different birds out there that are very pretty. So I can imagine a lot of variance in terms of beautiful birds. Okay, so but pointing that out, we can say very clearly that birds are not reliably attractive to other species, right? And even male birds are barely reliably attractive to the females of their own species, right? Most male birds are not attractive to humans. Male birds, of course, they're not attractive to other male birds. Male birds of one species they're not even attractive to the female birds of other species, right? So there's like this sort of, clearly there's something parochial going on here, like something that's based on the DNA. The attraction from one bird to another bird is based on their DNA. It's pretty clear. Just to reiterate, the reason why I'm saying that is because peacocks, male peacocks, are not attractive to swans. I don't think they live in the same area, so I was just throwing out a random bird here because I don't know what birds live around each other. Okay, but you get what I'm saying? A beautiful peacock is not going to attract a woman swan, female swan, which seems to suggest that there's a great limitation to the DNA. Okay, well, flowers, they attract bugs and birds and humans and a lot of other things. Okay, so I can see the case for flowers being much more wide-reaching than birds and less based on particular DNA. There's a lot of different DNA that make various different flowers. And, a wide range of DNA, different types and different variations make different flowers. Okay, and then they are attractive to a wide range of different bugs and bees and birds and people. And all those birds and bees and bugs and people have different DNA, of course, different species of bird, different species of bees, different species. They're all totally different. I mean, not totally different, but they're all very different. Okay, they're all different. They're all different. So that means that in some way suggests that it is less based on DNA. So the fact that it is less based on DNA would mean that it is more objectively beautiful because it relies less on arbitrary background knowledge. That's the case for flowers being more objectively beautiful than peacocks. It relies less on arbitrary background knowledge. Okay, but that's still, man, it takes a lot of squinting and a lot of talking around it and a lot of thinking, but not thinking too hard to really make that case. The way that Bruce sees it and the way that I see it, people think that peacocks are attractive and many birds are attractive, and people think that flowers are attractive. Okay, so that's like one range of things, and then birds think that some birds are attractive, and birds think that flowers are attractive. Okay, now we already have like two different species liking these same things. So it seems quite similar to just say that they're both objectively beautiful or they're both parochial. I don't quite see why the argument follows that David Deutsch makes. But there's something there, somehow something there.
Yeah. I see his argument is very incomplete, and I think he would
admit that, right?
Admit that. I mean, it's just, I hear him saying is that there are just very valid reasons to think that at least certain aspects of beauty may be objective, may transcend the individual.
Yes. And you have to ask a question like, if aliens showed up, would they recognize our art as art? I think so.
I think they would. Yeah.
They would probably even recognize it as skillful and wow, this is an advanced culture.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
Unless you want to argue that there's something parochial that's between us and the aliens, I guess you could argue that. Yeah. That would seem to suggest there's something more going on.
Okay, I feel like I didn't realize this before, but this is the first time Peter talks. So that other voice was Peter. And Peter, in this case, gives a different conception of objective, which is closer to how I see it. Objective means it transcends an individual, and that was it. And I guess there's an implied thing because they talk about aliens too, so it transcends species or it transcends cultures. But I think personally, transcending an individual is enough to consider it to be objective. That's all we need. So I would say that any pattern or any knowledge-bearing structure that can transcend an individual context is objective. And I guess there's a degree to which it is objective based on the universality. Maybe there's something to be said there to recover that concept that Bruce likes of universality, but that's just how I see it. Objective means multiple different contexts. Of course, they ask if aliens will recognize our art, and you can imagine my response to that pretty immediately. It's pretty simple. Obviously, they would recognize the work of art. They would not be able to recognize the beauty that is based off of arbitrary things. They would only be able to recognize the beauty that is based off of things that are not arbitrary. The background knowledge, I mean, not relying on background knowledge that is arbitrary. Of course, there are some things that are arbitrary but easy to replicate. So you have some things that are arbitrary knowledge that's like based on DNA, and that would probably be difficult to incorporate into an alien. Like an alien would not be able to just take our DNA and then naturally incorporate it into their system. I don't even know if they have DNA. You know what I mean? But there are some things that are going to be pretty easy to incorporate. Like I understand English. I think it would be fairly easy for an alien to also understand English. That would be some arbitrary knowledge, arbitrary background knowledge in this case, but it'll also be pretty easy for that alien to incorporate, in which case then it would be able to appreciate the works of art that are based on English. Okay. But yes, I do think that aliens would be able to identify that there are going to be patterns in works of art that are able to stably replicate or survive, and they're hard to vary, and they have a niche, and they can cause psychological transformations and all those kinds of things. Of course, there's going to be differences in the background knowledge of the senses that the aliens have, or the range of the senses that they have, or whatever other DNA-based changes, and of course cultural changes. But we can account for all those things, and there will be some parts that are not based only on those.
And this is where I differ from a lot of the Deutschians. They'll start proclaiming we already know that these things are true, and we really don't. Right? Yeah. These are nascent theories that are super interesting that we want to pay attention to, but we're not there yet. We don't really have the necessary theory of beauty.
Yeah, I fully agree with this. I think that we're incomplete here. I have a lot to say about it, but we don't have a necessary finished theory of beauty. Right now, it's all vibes. That's how I said it. It's all vibes. But hopefully, we can get to something that is a necessary, an actual, real theory of beauty. I wish I knew more of these Deutschians that he's talking about, who already think that beauty is objective and have developed a full theory of objective beauty. I haven't heard too much of any of them at all. I know of one person who thinks about objective beauty, and I don't even know if he thinks about it fully, through the lens of the four strands, for example. I don't know, I'm thinking of Tom Hyde right now. And so there are very few people who talk about objective beauty or talk about beauty at all from this lens of David Deutsch's philosophy. But I think to me, it seems like an important and an easy step to get to a theory of beauty that's actually helpful and useful and can apply widely and can be improved. Start with the four strands, start with Popperian epistemology, be knowledge-based. Start with the Richard Dawkins theory of replicators. Start with Alan Turing's principles of computation, or the theory of universal computation, and the fact that things are substrate independent and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, incorporate the multiverse. I haven't talked about the multiverse at all in this video, but that's a part of it too. So I think, incorporating all those things into your theory of beauty and your understanding of beauty, I think it's a first step, a helpful first step. But yes, incomplete. I feel like the pieces are laid out for much more clarity than has been currently, or in the past explicitly stated yet. But I'm still quite far from being able to articulate this properly. I think the pieces are here. All right, that was everything. I'm incredibly interested in the subject. I mean, that's pretty much what this whole channel is about. Unfortunately, not a lot of people talk about it, and I can feel it sometimes. Like some people talk about it to me because I talk about this publicly a lot, and I get a sense that people are excited about it. Some people have ideas about it, but some people are just afraid of saying the wrong thing, or it's a little embarrassing to say something that you misunderstand or something silly. I'm sure there's a lot in this video that I've said that was just wrong on his face, or I'm rambling too much or whatever. It's a little bit embarrassing sometimes, to just be so wrong about something, or to be so inarticulate about certain things. Okay, yeah, and then sometimes you lead to silly conclusions and all that. But I understand that. Uh, Hopefully, we can make a space where people become more comfortable just talking about their ideas of aesthetics, so that we can actually progress these things. Because the only way to progress them is to have a bad idea that's pointed out, and then you update and have a better idea. You remove the errors, right? Okay. Anyway, I think it's helpful to explicitly clarify our theories, show what conclusions they lead to, be wrong about certain things, and then we can update them, even if they're wrong, even if you start silly, even if you seem a little bit embarrassed, or if you are embarrassed, seem a little silly. Okay. I just want people to talk about it more. I don't know. This is my really poor attempt to encourage people to talk about it. I don't know how to persuade people at all, but that's just what I want. I wish more people talked about it. Okay. That's the world I want to live in, is that people talk about this stuff more freely. Okay. The only way to make a good theory is to start somewhere. All right. So I'm glad that David Deutsch has talked about this stuff. He got me into all of the whole rest of theories of knowledge and epistemology and blah, blah, blah. His whole other philosophy. The only reason why I care about it is because he talks about aesthetics. I'm glad he talked about it. I'm glad that Bruce talks about it. I love everything that Bruce produces. So big fan of all of his work, and he talks about aesthetics. So that's really the thing that's got me hooked into it. Um, Deeply, deeply inspirational. These guys have been, and everybody else in the community around Karl Popper and David Deutsch and so on. Highly, highly inspirational. Okay, so in the end, we came with 5 different conceptions of objectivity in beauty from Bruce and Peter. Maybe there was even more. I can even think of more as I'm saying it. So objective means hard to vary. Objective means that there error correction happens. Objective means that there's an underlying universal thing that we're approximating. Objective means that you could be wrong. And objective means that something transcends the individual. Those are 5 different conceptions of objectivity for beauty. Beauty meets some of them, beauty doesn't meet all of them. Okay. And then I have the conception of objectivity is just that it's objective knowledge. It transcends any singular particular context. It can be independently improved by people. You can increase its niche. You can increase its reliability. And I have different evaluations of objective beauty. So the degree to which it resists variation, that's how hard to vary it is. The how widely it replicates, it replicates into several different contexts. How reliably it causes transformations, and that deals with the accounting for its background knowledge. And then the aesthetic content that it has. You evaluate how broad the aesthetic content is. Is it super narrow, or does it cover many different dimensions? Okay. Thank you for watching. Thanks for getting all the way to the end. I hope this was interesting to somebody. Please leave a comment if you got all the way through this, and if you have some ideas. I'm sure you have some ideas after hearing all that. Tell me something. Hit me in the comments. Thank you. See you guys.